She stood alone on the platform while the train hissed behind her, steam rolling past her boots like a warning. People moved around her with purpose. They were greeted, hugged, claimed. No one came for her. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase as the truth settled in. The man who promised to meet her was not coming. And in that moment, with dust in her throat and fear in her chest, she understood how easy it was for a life to disappear. Then a child broke free from the crowd and ran straight toward her, eyes wide and shining. He slammed into her skirts and clung to her like she belonged to him. "Mama," he said, shaking, "you came back." And the world went still. The train's whistle screamed again as it began to pull away, leaving behind a thin woman in a worn gray dress and a boy who would not let go. Eleanor Finch stood frozen, her breath trapped somewhere between her heart and her lips. The child's arms were tight around her waist. Too tight, desperate, like someone afraid she might vanish if he loosened his grip. She knelt without thinking, the rough wood biting through her knees. Slowly, carefully, she rested her hands on the boy's shoulders. He was light, too light, all sharp bones and trembling hope. "Sweetheart," she said, surprised by the softness of her own voice, "I think you made a mistake." "No," he said quickly. "You look just like her, just like Mama in the picture." His voice cracked. "Papa said she went away, but I knew she'd come back." A man pushed through the crowd, breathless and pale, his hat missing and his eyes dark with panic. "Noah," he said. "Noah, stop." He reached for the boy's arm and hesitated when he saw Eleanor's face. The boy twisted closer to her. "Papa, look at her." The man did, and something shifted in his expression. Shock, maybe, or memory, or grief that had learned new ways to hurt. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. He lost his mother last winter. His voice tightened. Sometimes he thinks he sees her. Eleanor's heart ached. She knew that kind of loss, the kind that lived in the body long after words ran out. She looked back at the boy, at his storm-gray eyes swimming with tears. "What's your name?" she asked. "Noah Turner," he whispered. "That's a strong name." She swallowed. "I'm Eleanor Finch. I just arrived from Pennsylvania. I've never been to Wyoming before today." Understanding flickered, then shattered. Noah's face crumpled as the truth landed, and his sob finally broke free. Eleanor gathered him in without thinking, holding him while he cried against her shoulder. The crowd watched in silence. No one spoke. The man turned away, scrubbed a hand down his face, then looked at her again. "Caleb Turner," he said. "Thank you for being kind to him." She nodded, unsure what to say. Kindness felt small compared to what this child had lost. Caleb studied her, then glanced at the empty platform. "Were you expecting someone?" The question landed hard. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I was." She didn't add that the man she'd crossed half a country to meet had vanished like smoke. She didn't say his name yet. Saying it might make the truth heavier. Caleb followed her gaze to the train disappearing down the track. He seemed to understand anyway. "I know this isn't my business," he said carefully. "But if you need a place to sit, there's shade by the mercantile. It's hot today." "I'm fine," she lied. She wasn't. She had $17 in her pocket and nowhere to go. Everything she owned was in the battered suitcase at her feet. She had planned for a new life. A modest one. Honest work. A home. She had not planned for abandonment. A murmur moved through the onlookers. Names were whispered. Eleanor felt their eyes on her. Curious. Judging. Then Caleb stiffened. "Eleanor," he said slowly. "Who were you supposed to meet?" She lifted her chin. "Henry Cole." The name rippled to the crowd like a drop plate. Caleb's jaw tightened. Noah looked up sharply. "You were coming to marry Henry Cole," Caleb said, his voice gone cold. "Yes." Silence, thick and heavy. "I think," Caleb said at last, "there are things you need to know." Before she could ask what he meant, Noah slipped his hand into hers again. Not tight this time, just enough to feel her there. "Don't let him take you," the boy whispered. Her throat closed. "No one's taking me anywhere," she said gently, though she didn't know if it was true. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Not here." Too many ears. He nodded toward the street. My wagon's nearby. Let me take you somewhere quiet. You look like you haven't had water in a while. She should have refused. Should have protected herself. But exhaustion pressed down on her bones, and fear had made her honest. All right, she said, just a talk. As they walked away from the station, Eleanor felt the weight of the town settle on her back. The whispers would follow. She knew that. They always did. Noah walked between them, still holding her hand. She should have pulled away. She didn't. Caleb lifted her suitcase into the wagon, frowning at its lightness. This all you brought? Yes. He nodded once, as if that told him everything he needed to know. They rolled out of town in silence, dust curling behind the wheels. The prairie opened wide around them, endless and unforgiving. Eleanor watched the horizon stretch farther than she'd ever seen. And for the first time since stepping off the train, she let herself breathe. Henry Cole isn't a good man, Caleb said finally. Her stomach dropped. He's done this before, he added. He won't be coming for you. But that doesn't mean you're safe. She closed her eyes, gripping the edge of the seat. The wagon turned toward the open land, carrying 3 people bound by loss toward a place none of them understood yet. The wagon creaked as it left the town behind, wheels humming over packed dirt. Eleanor sat stiffly on the bench, hands folded in her lap, feeling the prairie stretch wider with every turn. Wind brushed her face, dry and warm, carrying the smell of dust and grass. Noah leaned against her side, quiet now, his small body rising and falling with tired breaths. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. His shoulders were tense, like a man bracing for something he could not yet see. You said he's done this before, Eleanor said at last. Caleb nodded once. Advertised for brides, wrote pretty letters, promised homes and honest living. His jaw tightened. Then he vanished, or showed up late, or made trouble. Women came here with nothing and left with less. Eleanor swallowed. Why did anyone stop him? Caleb glanced at her. Shame keeps people quiet. And fear. He looked ahead again. Small towns don't always protect the right ones. The wagon rolled on. Noah stirred, then looked up at her with solemn eyes. You really are my mama, he said quietly. No, Eleanor said. I'm not. He thought about that. But you held me like she did. Her chest tightened. I'm glad I could. He nodded, satisfied for now, and leaned back against her arm. They reached the ranch just before the sun dipped low. A weathered house sat against a vastness, porch wrapping around its front like open arms. A barn stood nearby, solid and worn. It wasn't grand, but it was cared for. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. It's not much, he said, but it's home. Eleanor stepped down, legs stiff, and looked around. The air felt quieter here, the kind of quiet that listened back. Noah hopped down and waited for her. This way, he said, tugging her hand. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old wood, with a faint trace of lavender lingering like a memory. The front room was simple. A stone fireplace, a worn sofa, boots by the door. It felt lived in and lonely. I know it's a mess, Caleb said. We've been managing. It's fine, Eleanor said, and meant it. She had lived in worse. Noah showed her upstairs to a small room with a single bed and a window that looked out over the land. A quilt lay neatly folded, untouched. This was for guests, he said. But nobody comes anymore. It's perfect, Eleanor said softly. His shoulders lifted with pride. Supper was simple. Beans, cornbread. But they ate together at the table, and Eleanor felt something ease inside her. When Noah chattered about the horses and the creek, she listened like it mattered. Because it did. Afterward, Caleb cleared his throat. About your situation? She stilled. I won't stay long. Just until I find work. You don't have to rush, he said. You can help here for a few days. Room and board. Her relief was sharp enough to hurt. Thank you. Later, lying awake in the spare room, Eleanor listened to the house settle. She thought of the station, of Henry Cole's name spoken with warning. She thought of Noah's arms around her waist. Morning came with the smell of coffee. She found Caleb in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, eyes tired. I was thinking, he said. I could use help. Housework, meals. I'll pay you. It's honest. Her hands tightened around the cup. I accept. The days found a rhythm quickly. Eleanor rose early, cleaned, cooked, made the house breathe again. Noah followed her everywhere, asking questions, laughing more each day. Caleb watched it happen with something like awe. On the 10th morning, Eleanor was hanging laundry when she saw a rider approaching. Her chest tightened before she knew why. Caleb stepped from the barn and froze. Go inside, he said sharply. Take Noah. It was too late. The rider dismounted with practiced ease. Fine clothes, polished boots, a smile that never reached his eyes. Well, he said smoothly, there you are. Eleanor felt the ground tilt. Henry, Cole, Caleb said coldly. Henry tipped his hat. Apologies for the misunderstanding at the station. Business delayed me. You left her stranded, Caleb said. Henry's gaze slid to Eleanor. Come now. She's mine by agreement. No, Eleanor said, finding her voice. I'm not. Henry smiled wider. We'll settle this properly. Noah appeared behind her, clutching her dress. Don't let him take you. Henry's eyes flicked to the boy with open disgust. How sentimental. Something broke inside Eleanor. She stepped forward. You don't own me, she said. You never did. Henry's smile vanished. You'll regret that. The threat hung heavy in the air. Caleb moved beside her, solid and unmoving. Leave. Henry laughed softly. This isn't over. He mounted and rode away, dust rising behind him like a promise. Eleanor stood shaking. Noah pressed tight against her. And Caleb, staring after the retreating figure with grim certainty. It started, Caleb said quietly. She nodded. She felt it too. The dust settled slowly after Henry Cole disappeared down the road, hanging in the air like a bruise that refused to fade. Eleanor stood where she was, Noah pressed against her leg, her heart still racing. The quiet of the ranch felt different now. Watchful, tense. Caleb was the first to move. Inside, he said gently, though his eyes never left the horizon. Both of you. They went into the house, the door closing with a soft thud that sounded louder than it should have. Noah climbed onto a chair at the table, swinging his legs, trying to act brave. Eleanor poured water with shaking hands. Is he going to come back? Noah asked. Caleb hesitated. Maybe, but if he does, we'll handle it. Eleanor looked at him. How? Caleb met her gaze. By telling the truth. All of it. They went to town the next morning. The wagon rolled down the familiar street, but Eleanor felt different now, exposed, as if eyes followed her from every doorway. She kept her chin lifted anyway. The sheriff listened without interruption, a broad man with iron-gray hair and a face carved by weather and years. When Eleanor finished, he leaned back and sighed. You're not the first woman Henry Cole's done this to, he said, but you might be the first willing to stand up. What does that mean? Eleanor asked. It means trouble, he said honestly. For him and for you. He documented everything. The abandoned meeting, the threats, the forged claims. When they left, Eleanor felt steadier. Not safe, but seen. The town was already talking. At the mercantile, whispers followed her down the aisle. At church, glances lingered too long. Eleanor felt the weight of judgment settle in familiar places. But something had changed. She wasn't alone anymore. Back at the ranch, life went on. Meals were cooked, floors swept, fences mended. Noah laughed more often now, though sometimes he grew quiet without warning, staring out the window as if waiting for someone who would never come back. One evening, after Noah had gone to bed, Caleb spoke. He'll try something, he said. Men like him don't let go easily. Eleanor nodded. I know. I can build you a small cabin, Caleb added. Give you space. Independence. She considered it, then shook her head. I don't want distance. I want honesty. He studied her for a long moment. Then we should talk about making this proper. The word lingered. You mean, Eleanor said slowly, marriage. Caleb didn't answer right away. He walked to the window, staring out at the dark land beyond. I love my wife, he said. I always will. I know, Eleanor said softly. I'd never ask you to forget her. He turned back. This wouldn't be love. No, she agreed. It would be protection, stability, choice. Silence stretched between them. For Noah, Caleb said. For both of us, Eleanor replied. They married 3 days later. Quiet, practical. A few neighbors, a simple ceremony. Eleanor wore her blue dress. Caleb wore his Sunday vest. Noah beamed like the sun itself. Life shifted after that, subtly at first. Eleanor became Mrs. Turner, and with the name came acceptance. Doors opened, smiles softened, whispers faded. But Henry Cole did not. He returned with papers and men, loud voices and threats. Eleanor barely had time to react before chaos broke loose. Go upstairs, Caleb ordered. Lock the door. She grabbed Noah and ran. From the window, she saw Henry gesturing, men spreading out. Fear iced her veins. The door crashed open below. Mrs. Turner, Henry called smoothly. There's no need for this. Footsteps on the stairs. Eleanor wrote quickly. A note, a name, a truth. She hid it where it might be found. When the door burst open, she stood straight. I'm coming, she said, but this is against my will. Henry smiled like he'd won. Outside, Caleb struggled against 2 men. Blood marked his brow. No, Eleanor said sharply, breaking free. I won't go. Henry struck her. Pain flashed white, but she stayed standing. Then a voice cut through the air. That's enough. The sheriff rode in with deputies. Neighbors followed. Witnesses. The forged papers fell apart under scrutiny. Henry's smile finally broke. He was arrested, charged, taken away, screaming. Eleanor sank to her knees, Noah clinging to her. You saved me, she whispered. He shook his head. We saved each other. The trial came weeks later. Eleanor testified. She stood in the courtroom and spoke her truth while Henry's lawyer tried to tear her apart. She didn't break. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. Henry Cole was led away, his threats finally hollow. Life returned to the ranch slower than before, but stronger. Eleanor and Caleb kept separate rooms at first. Habit, caution, until one night when silence pressed too close. I don't want convenience anymore, Caleb said quietly. I want real. Eleanor looked at him, heart pounding. So do I. They kissed, soft then sure. Winter came hard. Snow piled high. But the house stayed warm with laughter and light. In spring, Eleanor stood on the porch, hand on her growing belly, watching Noah chase calves in the field. Caleb came up behind her, arms around her waist. Funny, she said. I came here to marry a stranger and found a family instead. The best kind, he said. She smiled. Years passed gently. The ranch grew. The children grew. Eleanor and Caleb grew into each other, without effort or fear. Love settled where vigilance once lived. One evening, as Noah practiced roping near the corral, he paused and looked back at Eleanor. You know, he said, I never think about her face anymore. Eleanor stilled. Your mama? He nodded. I remember how she felt. But when I say mama, I think of you. Emotion rose swift and unexpected. Eleanor crossed the yard and pulled him into her arms. That's enough, she whispered. That's everything. From the porch, Caleb watched them with quiet understanding. Time did not rush them. It settled in slowly, like dust after a long ride, until days became seasons, and seasons stitched themselves into memory. Eleanor learned the shape of the land by heart, where the wind cut hardest in winter, where the grass stayed green longest in summer, where grief used to sit and no longer did. Sarah, their daughter, grew sturdy and curious. She toddled after Noah with fierce determination, falling often and rising faster. Noah took his role seriously. He warned her about snakes, taught her to throw pebbles, guarded her with a devotion that made Eleanor's throat tighten more often than she liked to admit. Caleb watched them with a quiet pride that softened his face. He spoke more now, laughed easier. Some nights, after the children slept, he and Eleanor sat on the porch without words. sharing the weight and comfort of each other's presence. On a quiet afternoon, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, sunlight warming her hands. She watched dust float through the air and thought about how close she had come to losing everything before it ever began. The sound of boots pulled her back. Noah stood in the doorway, taller somehow, his face serious. "I want to ask your blessing," he said. Her heart skipped. "For what?" He glanced outside where a young woman waited, pretending not to listen. "I want to build something of my own. Nearby, not far." Eleanor stood and hugged him without a word. "You already have our blessing," she said. "You always did." Caleb clapped Noah on the shoulder. "Just don't go too far." "I won't," Noah promised. The years that followed were kind. Not easy, but kind. Eleanor learned that happiness was not loud. It was bred cooling on the counter, boots by the door, laughter drifting in from outside, a hand reaching for hers without asking. One winter morning, Eleanor woke before dawn and knew. She dressed quietly and stepped onto the porch. The stars were bright, the air sharp, the land wide and waiting. Caleb joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You cold?" "No," she said, "just full." They stood together, watching the light slowly creep across the horizon. "I never thanked you," Caleb said. "For what?" "For staying. For choosing us when you didn't have to." She turned to him. "I was chosen too. By a boy who needed a mother. By a man who needed courage. By a place that gave me a life." The sun broke free of the earth. Later that day, Eleanor sat with Sarah on the porch. The girl leaned against her, older now, quieter. "Mama," she said, testing the word the way children sometimes did, even after years of saying it. "Yes. Do you ever wish things had been different?" Eleanor thought of the platform, the empty air, the fear, the moment her life split open. "No," she said, "because then I wouldn't have found you." Sarah smiled and rested her head on Eleanor's shoulder. That night, as the house settled and the wind whispered through the grass, Eleanor closed her eyes, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The train had left without her, and it was the best thing that ever happened.